Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Sarah. I'm one of the educators here at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California, and I'm so excited that you're joining us or we're joining you maybe at home or in your classroom because we're going to talk about some really cool animals today. Now, I know behind me you see our blue cavern, which is a kelp forest habitat here at the aquarium, and this is not what we're going to talk about today. We're actually going to be focusing on animals who live outside of the water but are still connected to the ocean. We're going to talk about birds today, but because we don't have a camera with just footage or feed of birds, we're starting in our blue cavern just to kind of set things up. Now, before we do jump into or fly into talking about birds, I do want to let you know that we'd love to hear from you today. If you have observations you want to share, if you have questions, if you want to answer one of my questions, we would love to hear from you. And we have a couple different ways you can reach out to us. So the first is a text line. That number is 562 286 1838. And Sergio, who's controlling everything you see, just put up that number. He'll take all those texts and he'll pass them on to me. Now, that text is if you're watching live and it is August 13th at 10 a.m., you can go ahead and text us because we've got our text line open on our computer. But if it's after the fact, we'd still want to be able to answer your questions and hear from you. We just ask that you email us at live@lbaop.org. And that way we can still correspond with you, still answer your questions, say hello, but we're not always watching that text line. So live, you can go ahead and text us. After the fact, go ahead and email us. All right, so we, as I mentioned, are going to talk about birds today, but I want to start in Blue Cavern, one, so you have something to look at, but also because I think it's a good way to start sort of warming up our scientist brains. Now, you might be wondering, who's a scientist that I'm talking to? All of you watching today, you are scientists. Now, you may not have realized when you woke up this morning that you were going to be a scientist, but I'm here to tell you, you are absolutely a scientist. Now, one of the easiest or the best tools that I think scientists use is their tools of observation. Now, this is not a tool that you hold in your hands, but it's how your brain works. And observations are just looking at something and describing what you see. And scientists use that tool when they're studying something new, or even when they're studying something that they know a lot about, because we can always discover new things by looking and describing those things we see. So I think it's a really good exercise just to kind of warm up those scientists' brains by making some observations of this habitat here. Now, this kelp forest, I called it Blue Cavern. It's one of the exhibits here at the aquarium, and it's modeled after a real site off the island of Catalina. It's one of our local habitats. We call it our ocean backyard. So if you live here in Southern California, this kelp forest, this is our ocean backyard. This is one of the big habitats that we have right here along our coastline. So let's make some observations. I'm going to give you about a minute, and you can go ahead and text us. Remember that number is 562-286-1838. You can write it down if you've got paper and something to write with. You can share with someone you're watching with. Maybe you're in class. You can maybe share with your partner or raise your hand and share with your teacher. Make sure you have your teacher's permission first before shouting out your answers. Or maybe you're watching at home and you can share with someone there, or even just think it in your brain. What do you notice? What observations can you make? Do you notice any colors? Those are observations. Do you notice any shapes in this habitat? That can be an observation. Do you notice any animals that you recognize? That's an observation. What about things that make up this habitat or this home that maybe aren't the animals? Is there anything you notice? Or even behavior. So what is happening? Those are observations as well. So while you're making your observations, I'm going to share some of the things that I notice. And maybe we'll have the same ones. Maybe you'll have some that I don't get, or I'll have some that you don't get. And that's really cool when you're in a scientific community, is sharing your observations, because while some things might be the same, you all might see little things that are different, and then that helps you sort of expand what you see by seeing those different perspectives. All right, so I noticed that there's rocks, right? There's a rock right here, a really big one. There's another one here, and then really big one all the way over there. Now those rocks, if you notice those are important because those help the kelp. So I noticed that there's kelp or seaweed. Now kelp or seaweed looks like a plant, kind of acts like a plant, but we call it an algae, and that's because it's missing something that plants have. So plants like grasses in your community or at your school or your neighborhood, trees, flowers, they all have roots, and those roots dig down into the dirt and anchor them. Kelp or algae don't have those roots, so the kelp needs something to attach to. It needs a hard surface. It uses the rocks. I noticed lots of fish. Did you notice lots of fish? Excellent. And I noticed that the fish are different sizes. So we have a lot of different fish, but there's a lot of different kinds of fish, and they're different sizes. Some are really small, some are sort of medium, and then some are really big. Excellent. I notice the fish are kind of, I'd say, milling about. They're not really zooming off any direction. They're not staying still. They're just kind of hanging around, kind of just swimming and doing their thing, doing their fish thing. Excellent. Any other observations? There's lots of things we can notice. But now that we sort of got our brains going, we're going to kind of hop out of the water and we're going to talk about birds today. Now, at the aquarium, we have lots of different birds. Some of the birds we call shorebirds because they live right here along our coast on our shore. And some of our birds, like our lorikeets, which we'll talk about maybe a little bit later, they aren't local to us here. And they live on islands, so they live near the water. But a lot of times we get questions of why do we talk about birds or why do we have birds at an aquarium? And it's because a lot of these birds rely on the ocean for survival. Just like us humans, we actually rely on the ocean for survival, even if you're not living along the coast. So us here in Long Beach, we do rely on the coast. It's where a lot of our goods come from, and that's true for the rest of the country, so through the port. But the biggest thing that we get from the ocean, whether you live along the coast or in the middle of the country, is oxygen. And that's same with our birds. So we all depend on the ocean. So birds, they are connected to the ocean, and that's why we like to highlight them. Now, what I want to start we've already started our program, but what I want to start with is I think it'd be fun to play a little bit of a game. Now, this game might be a little bit challenging, but what I really want to highlight is we're going to look at some baby birds and then look at their adult form. Now, when we think about baby animals, they're very cute. I agree. But a lot of times, some baby animals will look exactly like their adult form, right? A human baby, you know it's a human, because even though it's going to change a little bit, right? It's going to get bigger, it's going to grow more hair, its body might change a little bit. You know what a human baby looks like as an adult form, right? They look like people. But in the natural world, some baby animals, they look completely different from their adult forms. Some look exactly the same, but some look really different. So we're going to take a look at a couple different birds and their babies, and then see if we can figure out what their adult form is, or what kind of bird it is by looking at the baby. So I'm going to have Sergio bring up our first bird. Excellent. So baby birds we call chicks. So this right here is a chick of some sort. Now I wonder if anyone has an idea of what kind of bird this is. Now I can tell you when this bird grows up to be an adult, it will not look anything like this. But let's make some observations. What do we notice about this baby bird here? What color do you see it's covering its body? Yes, it's kind of gray. Now, I want us to think about, if you were to describe what is covering its body, how would you describe it? What does it kind of look like? Because to me, it looks like fur. Do you agree? You can give a thumbs up if you agree it kind of looks like fur, or thumbs down if you're like, nope, I know that's not fur. Well, I know it's not fur, but I do think it kind of looks like fur. Because birds, they don't have fur, they have feathers. So even though it looks kind of like fur, it just means that these type of feathers, we call them downy feathers because they're really soft and fluffy. And as this bird grows up, it's going to lose those downy feathers, and it's going to get other feathers that do look more like we recognize feathers to be. So it does look really fluffy and fuzzy, almost looks like it has fur, but we know that those are feathers. It's gray. Let's look at its beak, right? Its mouth. It's got kind of a big beak. It's not very long. It's not super pointy, but it is kind of a big beak. I wonder if anyone has a guess of what kind of animal or what bird this is. Now, before we go to the adult form, I'm going to have Sergio bring up, we have a picture of the juvenile form. So when we talk about how animals grow their babies, then juvenile is like a teenager. So it's not quite a baby anymore. It's not quite an adult. And some animals even go through those different stages, and they look different in those different stages. They don't go from baby straight to adult. So let's bring up a juvenile, or there's I think a picture with 3 of them in it. All right, so let's take a look at this bird and its juvenile form. Does this give you another hint? Now, you might know from this picture what animal, but also maybe you're still unsure. But let's take a moment and think about that baby form to this one. Do these ones look as fuzzy and fluffy as that baby chick we were looking at? I would say no, not so much. The color is similar, right? Especially like this one back here. if we look at its head, or this one right here, the back, it's still kind of gray, like that baby. But those feathers, they definitely look more like feathers than they do like fluff or fur. Now, does this give anyone else a better hint of what this animal is? So go ahead and think it in your brain. You can share it out in your group. You can write it down. But let's see what kind of bird this is. Ta-da! Did you know that? Is that what you guessed, that they were penguins? Excellent. So penguins, they can look really different when they're in their baby form versus their adult form. Now these penguins here, these are emperor penguins, which is the largest of the penguin species. The penguin chick we were looking at before, that was a Magellanic penguin, which not the smallest, not the largest. This is what the adult form looks like. The Magellanic penguins are the ones that we have here at the aquarium. We've got a flock of 14 hanging out outside, and those chicks are ones that we have had here. So our penguins do have breeding pairs, and they do lay eggs occasionally, and we will raise their chicks. And so those babies, here we go, were raised here. So here you can see the egg. This is what we call candling. So basically we're looking inside to see if there is a chick growing in there. And then here is one of our proud penguin parents. Now I'm not going to say proud mama, because while the females do lay the eggs, both males and females for penguins take turns and work together to incubate or to cover the egg, keep it nice and warm and protected, and help raise the chick together. So it's a proud parent covering its egg, you can see down below. Let's go back to that emperor penguin for just a moment. So when we were looking at the Magellanic penguins, we saw that baby chick was like super fluffy and really light gray and looked very, very different from the adult form. Now, not all penguin chicks look the same. So in this picture here, we have both adult emperor penguins and penguin chicks. Take a look. Oh, I'm right in front of it. So right here, this is a emperor penguin chick. Now, this one might look more like a penguin when it's in its chick form, but take a look at the chick compared to the adult. Do they look the same? Well, they look pretty different, right? Now, their body shape might be the same, but they have those sort of downy feathers too, so they're really soft and fluffy. Here's the back of one. We've actually got a lot of chicks in this picture. All the way back here, these are all chicks here. There's one here. And their coloring is really different. Look at the heads of the adults versus the baby. So we're able to tell when there are chicks in a colony or a flock because they look so different from their adults. Now I want to talk about those downy feathers for a moment. Penguins spend a lot of their time on land, but they also spend a lot of time in water. Now these emperor penguins, they do live in the ice and snow. The Magellanic penguins that we have here at the aquarium, they don't live in ice and snow, which is why we can safely have them here at the aquarium and have them outside in our exhibits, because the place they live on rocky shores, places like this, in Argentina and Chile. And so their habitat and the climate they live in is actually pretty similar to what we have here. They just need really cold water. And so we make sure that we provide space for them to swim in the cold water. So not all penguins live on ice and snow. Some live in rocky beaches, but they all do spend time in the water. They have a migration period where they go really far distances, and they're basically looking for food. They're feeding during that migration period. Now those babies, those chicks, they look so soft and fluffy. They are not going on any migration. They are not going in the water at all until they shed or molt. We call it molting for birds, until they molt those downy feathers and they grow their adult feathers. And that's because as an adult, their feathers are basically waterproof. Let's see if we can get a close-up look at maybe a Magellanic penguin. Take a look at their feathers. Excellent. So take a look here. So it almost, I would say, it doesn't even really look like feathers. I would compare it to scales, maybe like on a fish, where they're really flat things that kind of cover their body, almost like a suit of armor covering the body of that animal. The feathers on the penguin on the outside of an adult penguin, they basically interlock. So they fit nice together right on top of each other. And then what the penguins do is they have a little gland down near their bottom at their tail, and that gland secretes an oil. And they'll take their beak and they'll dig it into that little oil gland, and then they'll coat those feathers. And so those feathers not only lock together, but they're covered in oil, and that helps waterproof them. But as babies, those downy feathers, they're not coated in that oil, and they don't fit together. So if a chick were to go in the water with those downy feathers, then the water would hit their skin. It would make those feathers all sort of damp and kind of crumpled almost, and it would chill the body of that penguin, and they probably would get sick and they may not survive. But as an adult, when they have those interlocking feathers actually cover downy feathers. And they because they interlock and they're covered in oil, they prevent water from touching those downy feathers. So those downy feathers are used for warmth. Those outer layer feathers are used to protect their body and keep them from getting chilled. So birds have feathers, but penguin feathers are really specific to them because of the places they live with cold water. Excellent. So penguins are one of the birds that we talked about. We looked at how they look as chicks, and they look very different as adults. But let's take a look at maybe another bird and see if we can figure out, or just to see what the chicks look like versus the adults. Oh my gosh, it's so cute. All right. Now, this one, I will say that before I worked here at the aquarium, I didn't know this bird was a bird, that it existed. So you may not be familiar what this bird turns into, but I think it's so cool to take a look at this chick and then look at what the adult form is, because they're really fascinating birds, and they have a really cool statistic that I'm going to share once we look at the adult. But what did you notice? What observations can you make about this chick? Well, I noticed first off that it looks very different from the penguin, chick or adult, or even the juvenile. Right? What's one of the big differences? Look at its lower half. Its legs. It has really long legs. Now, this chick is very small, really low to the ground, but it's got long legs. And then look at these toes, too. It's got really long toes. It's also got some cool colors and patterns on its body, right? It's kind of this brownish color with some darker, like maybe tan with brown spots, kind of swirly patterns, and then a white belly. Now, think about this chick. The color on its body, do you think that there's a reason for that coloring? Well, actually, we'll get back to the coloring once we look at the adult. So, this bird, I will tell you, is called a black-necked stilt, or stilt. So let's take a look at what an adult stilt looks like. Ta-da! Can you believe that that chick turns into this bird here? Now, we call them black-necked stilts because as adults, this is their coloring. They've got that white belly, and the whole back of their body is black, including their neck. Now, this one's kind of hunched over, but they do have a bit of a longer neck. But before we get more into the black-necked stilts and that statistic I wanted to share with you, I want to take a look, if we can go back and forth between this adult and that baby, and take a look at how different their coloring is. And maybe let's see if we, oh, here we go. This is perfect, because this is parent and chicks at the same time. So we've got the adults and the babies. Now take a look at their baby's coloring. Can you think of a reason why they might be that color? Now as adults, their colors are going to change, but look at their habitat maybe, or their home. Now these are what we call a shorebird. So they're going to live along wetlands, waterways, right along the shore of the ocean. So they're not living fully in the water. They do go in the water. But they are also found on land, sandy areas, rocky areas. And what do you notice about the colors here? Here, here. There's rocks, different colors, different almost like patterns. Ah, there's patterns there, and there's patterns on the bird's body. So as a chick, when they're more vulnerable, right? Baby animals can be more vulnerable. They maybe aren't as strong as the adults. For a lot of birds, babies aren't ready to fly yet if it's a flying bird. So it's easier for predators to catch the babies. And so these babies are better able to camouflage into their habitat. So if this bird were to take a seat and sit down and maybe like tuck its body in, it might be really hard to spot this bird amongst its habitat because its feathers and the color of its body help it to blend in. But then as adults, their body definitely changes. They get larger, their legs turn pink, and then their feathers turn black and white. And their beak grows a little bit. Look at this tiny little beak here versus the long beak of the bird here. So their body will change. Now, that statistic I wanted to share. Black-necked stilts, not a very large bird. They don't get very tall. I'm not sure exactly. Maybe we'll have Sergio look up how tall a black-necked stilt gets. But what I will tell you is not very big. They're maybe like this tall, which I know is kind of hard to tell on a screen, but I'll give you a number in just a moment. But black-necked stilts have the longest leg to body ratio, second only to flamingos. So think about flamingos. Flamingos are huge animals. They are way bigger than a black-necked stilt. But so black-necked stilts only get about 14 to 15 inches tall. So black-necked stilts only get about 15 inches. So it's a little taller than a foot. So pretty small. Flamingos, much larger. So flamingos have the longest legs of any bird. Black-necked stilts are second, have the longest legs of any bird, second to flamingos, which I think is wild, given how flamingos can be 3 to 5 feet tall, so like 2 to 4 feet taller than this bird, and these black-necked stilts have very long legs. Now, those legs are important, right? Legs are important for all animals. They help us move and do lots of things. But for a shorebird, which are often wading birds, now there's not all shorebirds are wading birds, but a lot of shorebirds are what we call wading birds. And not wading like you're waiting for the time. Wading like swimming in the water, kind of wading your way in. So what that means is these birds, they walk into the water. They don't go diving the way that penguins do. They don't really swim, but they will kind of walk into the water. Now, their feathers, you can notice, they're a lot more feather-like than those penguins. They're more similar to feathers that you might find sort of in your community that maybe a seagull or a pigeon has dropped. Similar feathers to theirs. They're not waterproof. They don't interlock the same way that a penguin does. And so they don't really want to get their feathers wet the same way that penguins might. And so having those long legs help them to, excellent, perfect picture, to wade into the water. Now the water is where they're going to be getting their food. So they want to be in the water to find worms or little crustaceans, maybe tiny fish, little algae or bugs that are in the water. But they don't want to get their full body wet. So having really long legs, also a long neck, and a long beak helps with their reach into the water to find their food. Now, if you live here in Southern California, we actually have these birds in their natural habitat. There's an area called the Bologna Creek Bike Path, which leads all the way to the ocean over in like Marina del Rey area. And if you go along that bike path, there's a good chance that you will see these black-necked stilts. Now, the first time that I saw them, I was riding my bike. This was just a couple years ago. And I heard this kind of squawking, and I turned around, and there was a whole flock of these black-necked stilts that flew in and landed on the water. And I was shocked because I recognized them from working here at the aquarium, but I didn't think that I would see them sort of in their natural habitat. So a lot of these birds that we have here at the aquarium are shorebirds. You can see them here in our local habitats as well. So if you're able to go to that area, the Bologna Creek Bike Path, in that wetland area, it's a great place to look for some of these birds. Now, you won't see penguins. They are not one of our local species, but you will see some black-necked stilts. All right, I think we've got another baby bird that we can look at. Now, this one is also not going to be a local species to us here, but let's see another baby bird. Oh, it's so cute. Now look how tiny this one is. Fits in someone's hand. So this is a chick that was raised here, which is why someone is holding it. What do you notice about this bird? Does it look similar or different to the black-necked stilt chick or the penguin chicks? Now I think something that they all seem to have in common is as babies, they all look pretty fluffy, right? This bird, I think, looks like it has fur just the way that those penguin chicks and even the black-necked stilts did too. But we do know it's a bird, so even though it looks fluffy like fur, they are feathers. What else do you notice about its body? It's pretty dark, right? Almost like a black color, including its little beak right here. And it's kind of got a pointy but short beak. Now let's take a look at what this bird will turn into. Ta-da! Is that what you thought? I probably would never have guessed that if I hadn't seen the pictures, known what a baby puffin looks like, which I will tell you baby puffins are called pufflings. You learn one thing from today's program. You can tell people that baby puffins are called pufflings, which is like the cutest thing ever. Anyways, puffins. So this is what adult puffins look like. Now, we have two kinds of puffins here at the aquarium. There's only a few different types of puffins. These are what we call horned puffins because they've got these little horns right here. Kind of looks like horns at least. And then there's also tufted puffins, which let's see if we have a picture of a tufted puffin. Excellent. They've got this cute little tuft behind their head or like kind of feathers hanging out. So tufted puffins and horned puffins. But the baby puffin, that puffling, is going to grow up to an adult and look like this bird. So maybe the color, that's probably I think of the three birds, the color is most similar from the baby or the chick to the adult, right? That puffling was pretty dark black, most of its body. And the adult puffins, their feathers are black too, but they do have white on their face. And take a look at their beak and their feet. Ooh, their feet. That is a huge difference from what that puffling looked like. Let's look back at that puffling really quick. Excellent. So even its beak is dark, its body's dark. And then let's go to those horned puffins. Yeah, so they've got dark feathers, but their beak is this bright color. Now their beak is really interesting. What I think is interesting is their beak is pretty wide, right? For the penguins, they had not the longest beak, but they had a fairly long beak. And then the black-necked stilt definitely had a really long beak. The puffin's beak is not very long, but it's tall, right? It's kind of goes this way instead of outward. But their beak is really important, and that's going to help them catch their food. Now, puffins, they live in like Northern California up to Alaska. They like colder regions. They live on rocky cliffs. So we don't have too many rocky cliffs here in Southern California, and definitely not the cliffs where these puffins like to hang out. And then they like colder water than we have here in Southern California. And what they're going to be feeding on is fish. So what puffins will do is they'll fly out into the ocean, they'll catch a bunch of fish at one time, and they'll bring it back to their cliffside to eat or to share with their chicks. So let's take a look. I think we have a picture of a puffin that's got fish in its mouth. Excellent. Now this puffin has quite a snack in its beak. I wonder if we can count how many fish we see here. Let's see. It looks like there's maybe one underneath here, right? You can kind of see the eye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 9. Maybe 8 or 9. Now, that seems like a lot of fish, but they can actually catch way more. I think the record is something like 48 or 50 fish at one time, which seems wild to me, how they can fit all of those fish in there. But they actually will use their tongue to kind of press the fish up into different parts of their beak while they're kind of sticking out, and that anchors it in there so they can keep grabbing more fish. So they can take all this fish back to their chicks or to their flock and share all their food that they were able to catch with their bird community. So puffins are really cool, and a puffling is such a cute little animal. Excellent. Now we have a couple minutes left, and we have run out of the baby bird pictures that we have, but I did mention one bird that we do have here, and I thought we had some baby pictures, but I think it's just cool to look at this bird. So the last bird we're going to talk about, we don't have the chicks, but I want to spend the last 2 minutes talking about our lorikeets. So let's take a look at our lorikeets. Excellent. So these are our rainbow lorikeets. Now, I will tell you, as chicks, they don't look like this. Now, most birds as chicks are really cute. Lorikeets, a little less cute. They don't have all these colorful feathers. They are, and they're kind of scrawny, and they have these little pokey feathers that kind of stick out all around them. But then they grow into these beautiful birds. They're still cute as chicks. They're just not as beautiful as we see them as adults. Now, rainbow lorikeets are not local to us here in California. You're not going to find them where you find puffins or even where you find penguins. These birds live in places like Australia. And they're all over Australia. Sort of the way that we have pigeons and seagulls here, they have lorikeets in Australia. So they live sort of all over, and they're what we call nectivores, which means that they eat nectar or fruit juice. So they will use their beak, which is kind of hard to tell, but it's pretty pointy right here. And they will break into things like mangoes and other fruit, and then they just want the pulp and the juice from it. So if you look at their tongue right here, kind of looks weird, but their tongue is really important. At the end of their tongue are all these little hairs, and that helps them to lap up or drink all that nectar. So they aren't able to process nuts or seeds the way that other birds are. Definitely not able to process things like fish or worms or crustaceans. Their body just isn't built for that. So instead, they just eat the juice or the pulp from fruit. They'll also eat things like hibiscus flowers. I think we have a video of them eating here at the aquarium. So we have a couple different kinds of lorikeets here. This one that we're looking at right now is called a green-naped lorikeet because its neck, or its nape, is green. We also have a Swainson lorikeet, which I think kind of looks like a sunset, and we have Edwards lorikeets who have yellow on their chest here where the green-naped has the stripes. Now this one right here might be a young lorikeet. So that's kind of the baby. It looks more like a juvenile. So you can see that it's kind of growing out of those downy feathers that have no color, and it's slowly starting to get these colored feathers. And here you can see them drinking. So we give them sort of a mix of nectar. We get this powdered nectar from a supplier. So it has all the nutrients that they would need to get from all the fruit that they get or that they naturally eat. And then we mix it with some water and we give them this little smoothie concoction and let them feed. So here you can see them using their tongue to lap up that nectar. Still pretty cute. Even looking kind of goofy. Excellent. All right, everyone. I hope, oh, here's a good picture really quick of the 3 different types of lorikeets that we currently have. I think actually we have a couple new species who have joined our aviary or our flock, but we don't have a picture of them. So these are the 3 that we have had here at the aquarium. All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed looking at some baby birds and seeing how they sort of transition or how their body changes into their adult form, and then learning a little bit about those penguins, about those black-necked stilts, about puffins and pufflings, and then a little bit about our rainbow lorikeets. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you again next week. Bye, everyone.